Good morning. I'm Dr. Joe Lamb. What you're seeing here is a picture of the Burren, the limestone foothills in County Clare in Ireland. In Gig Harbor this morning, the fog rolled in across Henderson Bay and it went from being sunny to cloudy and foggy within just a few minutes. And it made me think about how much fun it would be if we could go for a walk and have this talk instead. But instead, we're right here in the office today, and we're going to be talking about nutrition for cardiovascular health. And instead of taking a healthy walk as we did it, we'll kind of sit back and talk about what we know about nutrition and food plans for cardiovascular health and what our goals should be. So last week last Monday morning, or I guess it was actually 2 weeks ago, because of the fact that last Monday I was out of town. 2 weeks ago on Monday morning, we visited the topic of nutrition, and we talked about macronutrients, and we talked about micronutrients, and we talked about phytonutrients, all as components of a food plan that you could tailor for your specific needs. So, when we're looking at cardiovascular health, for a long time, the teaching was that a low-fat diet seemed to be crucial for preventing the development of heart disease. We've had this model for a good while now that high fats, particularly high saturated fats, were believed to lead to high cholesterol levels and the development of cholesterol plaques, atherosclerotic plaques in blood vessels. But it's very clear that this is not the sole cause at all. Indeed, the role of inflammation and the role of oxidative stress and the role of hyperhomocystinemia and the list goes on and on. There are hundreds of risk factors for the development of heart disease. Toxicity from heavy metals, for example, possible infections, the endotoxin crossing over from a leaky gut. All of these components play a role in changing vascular responsiveness. Diabetes, smoking, they all add up, right? And they all add up to a picture that's not just about cholesterol. So the model of eating a low-fat diet or the model of eating a complex carbohydrate diet, like the American Diabetic Association diet, to kind of be low fat and try to be low glycemic. And we talked about what we meant by low glycemic last time, basically the concept of having carbohydrates that are not rapidly digestible and absorbable, so you don't get a quick spike in blood sugar followed by a quick spike in insulin, followed by changes in vascular physiology and changes in sugar content, and hence glycosylation of proteins like hemoglobin A1C, or glycosylation of fats, like you could glycosylate your low-density lipoproteins, and in doing so, that cholesterol, that LDL component, is glycosylated and becomes more pro-inflammatory. In the setting of all of this, those sorts of diets have paled a little bit towards eating a diet that we're more evolutionarily prepared for. It's kind of interesting that, when you think about epigenetics, when you think about the genes that are turned on and turned off, it's partly the environment that turns on those genes. The classic agouti mouse study, where you have a mouse that was deliberately inbred to be obese and to be diabetic and to have a shorter lifespan so you could have a treatment model. It was called the agouti mouse because those traits seemed to be linked to a trait that called out a whitish fur. And if you simply addressed methylation, the bookmarks on those genes, by giving folic acid, and methionine, and giving B12, giving support for betaine, giving support choline, support for healthy methylation while the offspring were in utero, that next generation were lean, they were brown-skinned or brown-furred, they were lean, they did not develop diabetes, and they had a longer life expectancy. And this just came about from which genes got turned on and which genes got turned off. So diet plays a really important role, diet during the time that we're in utero. And this was confirmed in observational work done after World War II. Many of you may have heard about the Dutch famine trial, for example. And the Dutch famine trial the Dutch famine experience wasn't a trial, but it was observations made that children born during the famine, and the famine occurred at the end of 44, early into 45, when the Allied troops were advancing across Europe, and they did not make it as far as the Netherlands, and the Germans pulled food supply, the Nazis pulled food supply out of the Netherlands and for their own purposes, and there was a major famine in the Netherlands as a consequence. And children who were in utero, particularly in the second trimester, when compared to their older and younger siblings who had been better nourished, they would grow up to have more diabetes, more heart disease, shorter life expectancies, and perhaps more schizophrenia than their siblings did. And this was a consequence of genes being bookmarked, which made them particularly thrifty. Similarly, the warrior type genes that we see in the Pima Indians that, lead them to conserve calories, that lead to healthy utilization and living in a tough environment like the American and Mexican Southwest, or kind of the northern part of Mexico, for years and years before industrialization and before the Pima Indians moved onto the reservation, are the very same genes that, when they're still turned on, are now leading the Pima Indians in a diet that's rich in complex carbohydrates and rich in fat to the development of obesity and rates of diabetes, type 2 diabetes, approaching 50%. And interestingly, the Pima Indians living south of the border with Mexico, still living more of a subsistence, natural kind of lifestyle for them, they are not obese, they are not diabetic, they are having the kind of normal pattern that they've had through the centuries. So the diets that we eat speak to our genes, turning on, turning off, depending if we're nutritionally replete or nutritionally deficient. Simple things like omega-3 fatty acids, because they can bind to G-coupled protein receptors on L cells in our intestines, can change the secretion of GLP-1, and GLP-1 changes the release of insulin by the pancreas and makes us more insulin responsive to a glucose load. And as opposed to like high glucose levels all the time, it makes us responsive to, high insulin levels all the time. It makes us respond to a glucose load more appropriately, similar to the kind of drugs that we give for that, which are called the GLP-1 agonists. So, DHA, one of the omega-3 fatty acids, plays a role there. So when it comes to diet, we've come around to understanding that it's not a simple low fat. It's not a simple you know, complex carbohydrate type diet. You know, indeed, as we've switched kind of not universally, I would say, but as you know, we've moved from the 1980s when the big emphasis was put on a low-fat diet. You know, it was interesting the switch from a low-fat. The switch from a high-fat diet to a low-fat diet entailed the increase of about 200 extra calories a day, and the development of atherosclerosis as a consequence, and obesity and diabetes, and maybe part of the contribution to the epidemic that we've had of obesity in this country. And so similarly, it becomes really important as we think about things to see what the next steps are, to see about where we're going to go, and to see what we can do with picking the right diet. So the diet that, you know, I actually like best is kind of a modification of what we may call a paleo diet. And in that regard, the modification is, you know, increasing the amount of plants over what traditionally people have looked at the paleo diet. People have looked at the paleo diet as one form of the Atkins diet. They look at it as being high fat, they look at it as being high protein, and they look at it as not being coupled with, you know, much beyond that. You know, our hunter-gatherer ancestors probably weren't as great hunters as, you know, we like to think they were. They were probably, you know, better thought of as good gatherers and reasonable hunters. You know, they didn't come home at the end of the day and go, honey, I've got the mastodon. Instead, the mastodon probably came home at the end of the day and said, honey, it was another busy day at the office. I had to step on 5 pesky humans. So, you know, yes, there was meat present, but the meat that was present was, you know, lean, obviously, because it was wild game, and you know, and it was balanced by everything that could be gathered, and there weren't grains for the most part, so there weren't these excess complex carbohydrates that were easily available. And before wheat domesticated us, we had a relatively high protein, relatively high fat, relatively high phytonutrient diet, lots of plant nutrients that came to us carrying information, telling us about the season of the year, you know, sunlight telling us about the season of the year. You know, when spring and summer and early fall were here, we were kind of in the mode of this is the time when we can be kind of not careful about our energy expenditures. We get out, we do things, we burn energy, we hunt, we gather. As the season changed, as you know, we start having the appearance of fruits and more gourd vegetables and the such, and more root vegetables. And particularly as we moved into the agricultural setting, this allowed us to get ready to hunker down for the winter and store some calories, and we'd get different messages from those foods. And so we've got to take all of that into account when we have the diets that we like to eat. You know, a high protein, high phytonutrient diet, which is what we call it here as part of our programs at the Personalized Lifestyle Medicine Center by Metagenics. When we look at these programs, you know, one of the things that we recognize is that they are relatively low glycemic, going back to that term that we had before, not a lot carbohydrates, not a lot of pressure on the insulin system. You know, they're kind of designed to be supportive of being insulin sensitive as opposed to insulin resistant. The macronutrient content is about 40% protein, about 40% fat, and about 20% carbohydrates. And most of that carbohydrate content is coming from vegetables, plants, you know, getting a broad variety. You know, a game that we've actually been playing a little bit, you know, Deanna Minnick came up with this, you know, plant diversity index. How many different plants can you include in the meal that you cook? And I play this game with my daughter as she's 18 and we've been doing some cooking, and she's vegetarian and, pescatarian. She'll occasionally eat some fish, but we play this game of how much can we include and how much, can we beat other people, and, text back and forth with Deanna sometimes about this. But, using spice mixes and the phytonutrients that are in the spices that we eat, I mean, all of these make a difference. And just counting up what you can do, cheating a little bit. Like, I particularly like the Morton and Bassett herbs de Provence because it gives me 9 different plants in that mix, and they're not typically plants that you would use as part of your meal. So, getting that diversity, getting all those messages, getting all that color, an important part of the diet, getting healthy proteins, and proteins as close to the way that our ancestors ate. So wild-caught fish is preferred, obviously eating it fresh, but, frozen is better than fish that's been allowed to sit too long. Fish that's been allowed to sit too long is relatively high in histamines, for example. Similarly, wild game, eating omega-3 fatty acid rich grasses and grains and, grazing, much better for us than eating corn-fed Wagyu beef that, may be all the range because it's, so marbled and has so much fat and seems kind of buttery, but it's, actually that deposition of fat is an indication of the poor health of the animal that's eating that corn. So, we want to stay away from that. So, thinking about the hierarchy, at the top would be, wild caught fresh fish. Below that would be wild caught frozen fish. Below that, is probably like wild game or things raised like wild game. So organic grass-fed beef, for example. And then below that would be probably farm-raised fish. And then below that, commercial poultry. Obviously pasture-raised is better than cage-free, which is better than, no comment whatsoever. And then below that would be, commercial beef and chicken and pork. Lamb kind of falls into that almost raised like wild game type piece. You've got some of, some of the kind of wild game type things like wild boar or elk or venison. But, I recently had some farm raised venison, which was very bland in taste. It wasn't gamey at all, which implies that it didn't have a high omega-3 content, that instead it had a high omega-6 content, for example. So we've got to pay attention to how the animals we eat are raised and how they're cared for. That's kind of the hierarchy. And, vegetable proteins are good for us, and certainly eating soy once a day is certainly fine for us. Eating rice and pea-based protein shakes is fine. Low allergenic, good for detoxification, but we want them, as we talked about last time, to have branched-chain amino acids so that they're, complete proteins. The fats that we want to get in, we want to eat really good sources of fats. So nuts, olives, avocados, grass-fed butter, for example. Those components are good. And, using lots of olive oil on our vegetables, having the appropriate fats as part of what we eat. There's a role for medium-chain triglycerides, particularly in terms of being good for brain function, but we want to guard ourselves against eating things that we shouldn't be eating. So, when we studied this, both here at the Personalized Lifestyle Medicine Center and work that I also did with Nature's Sunshine products, the diet is a very healthy one. And when people ate this healthy food plan, basically they were eating about three palm-sized portions of protein a day. They were eating, 2 to 3 cups of veggies a day. Which would be, 4 to 6 half-cup servings. A half-cup serving, if it's something that was finely chopped up. If it wasn't, like if it was big broccoli florets, it'd be a cup serving. 5 ounces of greens a day, lettuces and spinaches and kale. Limited amounts of nuts, limited amounts of beans. No dairy, no grains, limiting alcohol intake, and limiting starchy vegetable intake. When we ate that diet in people getting about 950 to 1,100 calories from the dietary program, and then potentially substituting in 1 to 2 healthy shakes a day, or a shake or a bar or a good quality protein soup, supplementing that in, ending up at about 1,100 to 1,200 calories a day, because the shakes were substituted for a snack-sized portion. I'm sorry, there were 2 half palm-sized portions of protein as snacks, and the shake was substituted in for one of the snack proteins and one of the meal-sized portions of proteins. And in doing that, the calorie counts got up around 1,100 to 1,200 calories a day. Doing that, people who were obese, with a BMI greater than 30, who participated in a lifestyle change program, including exercise with the goal of 10,000 steps a day, and a cognitive behavioral program similar to the ones that, the Consilience Partnership is running at Feathered Pipe this summer and at Harmony Hill, and similar to some of the presentations on Saturday morning that you can participate in, or the work that we're doing in our Healthy Transformation program at the Personalized Lifestyle Medicine Center. Those behavioral change programs, coupled with the food plan, coupled with additional nutritional supplements like supplemental appropriately chosen strains of probiotics and fiber and omega-3 fatty acids and a complete multiple vitamin, people lost about 11 to 12% of their total body weight over 13 weeks. And that is really a remarkable change. When we consider that weight loss of 5% maintained for a year is the FDA's goal for a successful weight loss drug, losing 10 to 15% over 13 weeks in people who participated in the study, who switched over from the high protein, high phytonutrient diet to a low glycemic load food plan, where there was the addition of some grains and some starchy vegetables to the food plan, and a few more calories a day, getting into the neighborhood of 1,400 calories a day with optional use of the shakes, but an optional use of the nutritional supplements. Those people who participated and stayed in at the end of the year had maintained like a 9.75% total body weight loss over a course of 65 weeks total. So, the program works. The program provides the nutrients. There's been a lot of attention to using a ketogenic food plan. My biggest objections to ketogenics food plans is, for certain individuals, the potential negative impact upon their lipid numbers, number one, and number two, long-term, higher caloric, high fat, 70% of the calories coming from fat, for example, in a ketogenic food plan. If you're getting in somewhere in the neighborhood of, let's say to make math simple, 1,500 calories, 70% of those coming from fat. So over 1,050 calories a day, divide that by 9, and you're well over 100 grams of fat a day, which seemed to be the threshold in a study by Peniala at Pennebaker at LSU, which played a role in the development of kind of a leaky gut from fat toxicity. So, long-term ketogenic food plans may have negative consequences elsewhere. They may be good for hacking our bodies into like the biohack of, fat burning, but for long-term negative impact upon lipids, negative impact upon gut health may offset the benefit of the weight loss. Good for the short-term getting started. Good, maybe following a period of detoxification. One of the consequences of liberating fat is liberating the toxins that are hanging out in fat. So, all the persistent organic pollutants. So cleaning things up, starting on a ketogenic diet, switching to the high protein, or starting with a detox, switching to the high protein phytonutrient diet, a good way to go. Long-term, watching the percentage, the low glycemic load food plan starts dropping down so that, the amount of carbs start going up and the amount of protein has come down a little bit. And, you start moving into a balance of, maybe 30% protein, maybe 30% fat, moving up towards 40% carbohydrates as you make some room. One of the things we have to be aware of is that when, all these comments that I've made about food plans have really been focused upon, individuals, but as a society, and, Lauren Cordain answered this in a question to Jeff Bland years ago at one of the Institute for Functional Medicine's annual international conferences. He basically stated that, one of the biggest drawbacks to the paleo diet was it was non-sustainable at a planetary level. If every North American ate a paleo diet, unfortunately, the rest of the world would need to be depopulated to have the resources to provide for that. So long term, we need to find ways of eating plant-based food sources that provide us complete proteins, that provide us enough fiber, that provide us all the things that we need, that provide us good, healthy fats and ways to get it from nuts and olives and the such, so that we decrease our dependence upon animal proteins, still decrease our dependence upon fish, but still lead us to be healthy, low glycemic, quality proteins, quality fats. So these are the sorts of things that we work on here in the Personalized Lifestyle Medicine Center by Metagenics in Gig Harbor. We'll be coming back to you next week. As I said, next Monday will be our next cardiovascular health session. We'll be talking about nutrients and botanical support for cardiovascular health, and specifically, looking at what do you add, like how much fish oil is beneficial. Does garlic work? Where do hops fit in? Where does berberine fit in? Where does quercetin fit in, and all of these components to addressing our needs. So we'll be back at 4 p.m. today, Dr. Michael Stone and myself, to do Facebook Live on our Monday afternoon coffee break. Hope you'll join us then. Thanks a lot and have an awesome day.